So Reverend Dr. Ruth always manages to bring out exactly what Christine just shared in that reading, which is that even when I come in here feeling sorrowful or anxious or uncomfortable about today's world, Reverend Dr. Ruth always has me leaving feeling positive and knowing that I can make a difference. One person at a time, put that ripple out in the pond, as I call it. So let's all welcome Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller, and she's going to be sharing new possibilities.
All right. Thank you. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, I am? Yeah. Everything's different. The pulpit is on casters now, so all the angles are different. It's marvelous. Oh, some of you have heard that I was planning to be based in Yachats, and that got undone. So I'm still floating a bit, but I still have a place here in Florence. So just let go of the idea of finding in Yachats. New possibilities. This season, this day, this full moon following the spring equinox is one of the most important days in the ancient time, because the vernal equinox was the turning, but this was the setting of spring. Spring is here on the first full moon. And if you've ever wondered why Easter is always on a different day, because it's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the vernal equinox.
Right.
All right? So that's part of how it's been important in our lives, whether we liked it or not. We got chocolate bunnies on the first Sunday after the first full moon. And this was the time when the goddess, who is the basis for the words estrogen and hysterectomy, and hysteria, would become present. So way back at the beginning of February, at that midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, we had Imbolc, we had the coming of the maiden, of the bride, breed, the woman in the white carrying the white flowers, the bride or breed, right? And that was at Imbolc. And then we had the vernal equinox, and we will have Beltane on May 1, which is the midpoint. But this day is the day when the maiden has become a woman. And on May Day, Beltane, she becomes a mother. But now we're talking about the woman coming in her fullness with the bunnies and the flowers. Estra comes in with bunnies and flowers, and this is why bunnies and flowers are part of this Christian tradition that didn't have any rabbits around. So knowing, kind of imagine, in a world where there are no TVs, radios, or anything, and the starlight is the primary source of light, and then you're watching more and more light as the moon gets fuller and fuller, and then it's in its fullness, and it's almost as if those very, very, very short days have been extended a little bit by the full moon, right? And with that full moon, we're seeing the small furry critters come out into the world, and we're seeing more and more birds coming out into the world, and hearing them in the early morning, even as sometimes before the sun is up, and sometimes they're singing because they're seeing the full moon. Have you seen that? Have you heard the birds singing because that moon is so bright? Yes? And then we're also being aware that all of that frozen water is melting, and the streams are running again, and there are greens to be harvested almost everywhere. So now, at this point, we can begin to feast again after the long winter fast that the Catholic Church called Lent. Right? So we're moving into the feasting season again. So we've got light, and we've got flowers, and we've got critters, and we've got food, and it's really wonderful. Yes. And what's interesting is that was happening in Northern Europe while in the Middle Eastern area, something else entirely was happening. But both of them are about freedom, right? The song that we just sang is one of the songs associated with what we call Passover. Callista, there's lots of chairs over here. She's trying to sneak in and I won't let her. So, this idea of freedom that comes with the opening and the warming and the life returning was coming in a very different way down in the Middle East. And it was expressed over and over and over again. It's been at least 3,500 years that this particular celebration has been going on that we call Passover. Now, I was always taught to say Pesach. Okay?
It's both work.
All right.
Both are kosher.
Tuvia is the resident Jew this morning, and we've got Ruth and a few others. And it's just so cool to celebrate freedom at this time. And the freedom is, that you all probably grew up singing, "Go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land. Tell, O Pharaoh, let my people go." Right? And that's what that's about, the whole Exodus story, reenacted. And on the first full moon after the vernal equinox is when the people who were entrapped in Egypt at that time, who called themselves Israel. By the way, Israel is a people, not a place. But that group of people that called themselves Israel were told by their prophets, stay up all night, don't lie down, and paint some blood on the door during that full moon. Because that was the final plague of the 10 plagues. Now, some people date that at approximately 1225 BC, because that is the time of Ramses II, the great big pharaoh, the Aswan Dam pharaoh guy.
Yeah.
But I date it, and a number of people, I date it because of the scholars who do date it, at the time of the blowing up of the volcano at Santorini, called Thera.
Oh, yeah.
Thera happens to be my grandmother's name because her father was a geologist. Can you imagine naming a daughter a volcano?
Yeah.
She lived with that. Very difficult. Yes, exactly. It was hard for her to live with that. But anyway, Thera blew up approximately 1500 BC. And it happens that one could explain every one of the 10 plagues, including the dying of the firstborn, based on Thera's blowing up. Do you want to hear a little bit about that?
Yeah.
All right. So Santorini is in the eastern portion of the Mediterranean, and if you've been there, you go into this big hollow space, and then there's this rim. Well, that hollow space was a mountain, right, on the ship. And so that mountain, when it blew up, created incredible tidal waves, destroyed whole cultures in the Mediterranean. And one of the qualities of a tidal wave, those of you who paid attention to Singapore a few years back, is that the water recedes way far out there for a long time. But then it comes towering in and completely destroys everything that was there. Well, if in fact Israel was crossing the gap between Egypt and Israel, or Jordan or Sinai, during that time, that is exactly what could have happened. That the waters receded, they got across. Dance, Miriam, we got across. Miriam leads the dances, yes, we got across. And then they watch as the water comes rushing in and destroys the armies of the Pharaoh that have followed them across because Pharaoh changed his mind. Okay, so that's one. Another one is that because of the effects of the volcano, the rivers and ponds would have been carbonized as opposed to oxidized, so everything would die in them. And another one is that a fissure that would have been caused under the ponds and lakes and rivers would have let iron oxide come up into them, so they would turn blood red. And both of them would lead to the frogs jumping out, so we got a plague of frogs. And it just goes on. They all tie with the possibility that this huge volcano going off not very far away could have led to all of those awful experiences, which doesn't mean that if one accepts the idea of a higher power and nature is part of that higher power, that the higher power didn't make it happen. Right? So it's fascinating to me that we can weave all this stuff together. So what happens is, after 400 years in Egypt, and I've got a whole series of thoughts about that, and if you've got my book, Mary's Power, you've seen that. But the whole experience led to, by the point of Moses' maturity, the people that we call Israel feeling and totally enslaved. Now, they leave with an awful lot of gold. So they weren't impoverished, right? And so we get more of that in the book of Exodus, but they do leave in a hurry. So there is no time to let the bread rise. So unleavened bread becomes part of the honoring of this time. So when I was growing up, my Jewish family friends would all have to clean the house really good right before the full moon, and they had to wrap up a piece of leavened bread in a handkerchief and hide it. So the man of the house could find it and say, "You left leavened bread in the house." That's not okay. But that was part of the tradition that emerged in the European Israelite Jewish experience. So the idea of no leavened bread, because we had to leave in a hurry. They left the day after this horrid event of having to paint lamb's blood on the door and sit up all night. So that brings me to that final plague. One of the things that happens, and now it's been documented in other places, when there are certain kinds of earthquakes, the carbon dioxide that is at the bottom of certain lakes and streams, and we've already found that there probably is because of the depths of all of these critters, gets shaken up and crawls along the ground, and anyone sleeping on the ground is poisoned, died, right? They're carbon dioxided. So it happens that in Egypt at that time, the coolest place in the house was on the ground by the door. Everyone else slept upstairs. And all the Israelites were sitting up all night long. So the firstborn was given the coolest place in the house. If not, I'll strike thy firstborn dead. And that's what happened. And we're now beginning to find archaeological evidence for that. You know, a period of time where there are all of these, mostly boys, who are between the ages of 10 and 20, who are being entombed in the traditional Egyptian way during that period. So along about 1500, so that makes it 3,500 years, that this festival, this ceremony, this honoring of becoming free has happened. And these stories get woven into it. And there are 4 questions that are asked each time. The difference between the Israeli experience and the Celtic experience is the Celtic is almost entirely heart-centered, and the Israeli is almost entirely head-centered. And it's part of the reasons that as you look at the evolution of Europe, you can see that there are very different social functions played by different people of different descents. And in the Israeli tradition, the intellect is encouraged. And in the Celtic tradition, the heart is encouraged, as anyone who's from Ireland knows pretty well. So we've got that dance and that mix happening in the Roman era. Pesach is being experienced by all the Israeli descendants from all over the place. And they're not just in Jerusalem. You know, Paul grew up in Tarsus, the guy that we call Paul, who is Saul. And they're all over the empire, and they're celebrating this time of becoming free. And then the Romans adopt Christianity and they move up into the Celtic territories, and the Celtic territories celebrate this time of freedom. Estra has arrived. It is beautiful. Spring is here. Well, let's just take that on, because St. Augustine told us in 325, adopt whatever they do and adapt it to our story. So if you've ever wondered, all these pagan rituals, that's why they're woven in. That doesn't make it good, bad, or indifferent. It's just what is and has been, right? So now we've got all this merging and shifting and changing, and the Pesach, the people who are celebrating Passover are going, look what happened to us in the past. And the people who are celebrating Easter are going, look what's happening now. And then the Christians come in and say, and this other thing happened in the past, and it's even more important than any of that. Right? And interesting, lamb's blood is part of the Christian story as well as the Jewish story. And part of the reason for that, I periodically have to tell my friends this, I don't mind eating lamb. In fact, I enjoy lamb very much. I grew up on curry made with lamb. But the reason that lamb is part of spring is if you've got a herd of any critter, you've got a male and a bunch of females, right? That includes sheep. But when the babies are born, they're born equal. You got equal numbers of males and females. So what happens is you choose, right? You choose which of the many male baby lambs you're going to raise, and you eat the rest. And you use the skin for all kinds of things and the bone for all kinds of things, and you eat everything, because that's how you care for your herd and yourself. Does that make sense? All right. So over time, we got away from living with these live things, this life that is happening. We became civilized. We live in cities. We don't have to pay attention to nature. We live in cities. We put on air conditioners and heaters and all have walls and windows, and who needs to pay attention to nature? Nature is someone we're in conflict with out there. And so Easter begins to be about chocolate bunnies. And Pesach is about what happened years and years and years ago. And a friend of mine, his favorite joke is the grandma saying, yep, it's time for another feast. Right? They tried to kill us, we got away, thank God, let's eat. That little thing, thank God. Ooh, where did that one come into all of this? It turns out that humanity has a hunger for something greater, to rely on something greater than just our heads and hands. Not all of us live with that, because we're born in cities and we like the intellect and we don't care about all of that other stuff. And I went through that period until I studied comparative religions, an advanced course in anthropology. And I was talking about learning about the Mayans and the Maori and the Sonoy and the Navajo and the Haidu and all of these people all over the world. And I was going, do you know something? I may not be able to find any proof for what is a power greater than me, but every one of these cultures is saying there is. And a few of you have heard me say, so I took it as a working hypothesis. There is something out there greater than me. It's earthquakes and tsunamis, and if you've read James Michener, The Source, right? That's when that guy wakes up. There's something bigger than me in all of this, right? And as I was working with that hypothesis, I discovered the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he wrote an essay that I have called Humanity and the Oversoul. And he says, as I consider my life, I must acknowledge a higher origin for its events than the will I call mine. The same goes for my thoughts. I can desire, I can look up and become receptive, but the visions and answers come from some place outside of my normal waking self. So I've come to think of humanity as a stream whose source is hidden. When I watch that river of life and inspiration flowing into me from someplace I can't begin to see, I understand that I am a receiver of life, not the cause. Just as the earth lies within the soft arms of the atmosphere, humanity is also surrounded and embraced. He wanted to be a poet. He was an essayist, but there's a lot of poetry in his essays, right? We are part of a unity, an oversoul, in which each individual being is contained and made one with all the others. That oversoul is our common heart. He wrote a lot of other words, but that's all I'll share with you today. When we acknowledge the possibility that we are part of something bigger, in Unitarianism we say we're part of the interdependent web of life, and we look for a truth and meaning. And that truth and meaning isn't always available to our intellect. It comes through us in some form of inspiration, some form of revelation, and he talks about that later, that our interaction with the Oversoul feels as if it's something entirely new and different. But it's always been here. It's always now. It's always present. Wow. So when the Celts and the Wiccans and all those people the Romans called pagans because they lived in the country, they weren't civis, they didn't live in the city, they were pagans, they lived in the country. All those people honored this presence, this overpowering presence of something they called Esther that came through at the first full moon after the vernal equinox. When the sun was no longer setting and rising, and due west was beginning to creep a little bit north. It's kind of fun. Some of the roads I travel on are due north or due south or due east or due west. And I love to watch, okay, it must be the equinox. It's right in front of me. Oh yeah, we're moving. It's 1 degree up here because we're at 45 degrees. It's 1 degree a day. So you know that when we get to the solstice, it's going to be way over there or way over there. But on the equinox, it's right there. So as these people are being aware of that, and then they watch the full moon. So the full moon after the vernal equinox is rising not directly west, but just a little bit. So it's the east-west line. It's a straight line, right? And so they're watching that full moon come up, and they are knowing that now there will be no more dark winter days. It's over. And that is telling them that this great unfolding power that is so far beyond human will is being totally supportive of their well-being. And we celebrate these things, whether we call it Easter or Passover or whatever we want to call it. Today is Palm Sunday. Today is the day that Jesus entered into Jerusalem as the Messiah on a white colt in the Christian tradition. And he was bringing the possibility of something entirely new, because Messiah meant the complete turnover of what had been into something new. And whether you're a Jew for Messiah or not, or Jew for Jesus or Messianic Jew or any of those other folks, it doesn't matter. The idea of it was opening up incredible possibilities. The idea of spring opens up incredible possibilities, and you gardeners know that, right? And the idea of being freed from 400 years of being in one location, defining oneself in a particular way, opens up completely new possibilities. And the idea of having a government that is totally destroying everything that we ever thought was normal is opening up a whole bunch of new possibilities. And the point of that reading is, let us go into those possibilities and not bemoan what was in the past. Now, some of you have attended classes of mine in which I use this infinity symbol that is the diagram I used to describe a systems concept called panarchy. Now, you've heard of anarchy, oligarchy, plutarchy, all right? Panarchy is everything rules. Everything rules, okay? And when that happens, there is a cyclical process, and this cyclical process is what we are celebrating this week, this 8-day period in the Hebrew calendar. And it starts with, there has been a seed that was planted somewhere along the line. And that seed develops, and develops on its own. And then as it develops, it begins to connect with other beings, other entities. More and more other entities are involved as it continues to develop. And then it starts to shift. It doesn't grow so much anymore. It starts to get more and more structure, right? And then it's more and more engaged with other people and other entities and other processes. And all along, things are changing. Things are happening. Storms happen, windstorms, rainstorms, doesn't matter. Fires go by, whatever it is. You keep on going. But each of these events, you create more and more structure until you reach the point where you have so much structure that the smallest event becomes a catastrophe. Everything falls apart. Now that's based on Prigoggine's notion of dissipative structures, for those who care. And then as you go into that catastrophic experience, it begins to feel chaotic. Really chaotic. Things are not as they should be. Nothing seems to be going right. Nobody here is experiencing that. I know what you're going through, and I'm going through some of it myself, okay? We are all, each of us, as within, so without. We're all the microcosm of the macrocosm. We are experiencing this process for all of humanity, for the whole planet. So we've been so structured, so set in our ways, so civilized, so intellectual, that having this catastrophic event has got us ripping apart into chaos. And that chaos will last as long as we hold on to the past as the way things should be. As long as we hold on to that structure that we had created and been living in as the only possibility, then we swim around in this chaos, keep trying to go back, and it doesn't work. The only thing that can happen is because this is an infinity. There is a seed trying to happen here. What is that seed? If I can latch onto that seed that is trying to emerge here, then I can allow that seed and I can nurture that seed as it grows. And we go through the process again. And ideally, we do it with more and more wisdom and less attachment to the past. So that the next time the critical fluctuation happens that causes the dissipative structure to fall apart, the catastrophe happens, but we don't. We don't. The seed that is here, you all have heard me say before, and I'm going to say it again, you all are it. This community, this kind of community, this way of being in mutual support, this way of loving each other regardless of the differences, and in fact, sometimes because of the differences, right? This way of being open to each other's joys and concerns. All of this is part of the seed of what is trying to happen here. And the extent to which you are sharing that in the larger community, the extent to which you are maybe growing some in your own food, that would be good. The extent to which you are working to discover something.
It just went out.
Something that hasn't been before is the way in which the chaos no longer has to be your emotional state. Because you are living the new possibility. And that which was is supporting that, just as the fallen tree supports the new babies growing out of it, right? Just as the old leaves, feed the new plants in the forest floor. They're supporting and helping you nourish what is trying to emerge through you and as you, as all of us. So I invite you, go inside, allow that inspiration that is just right here. There, we are totally embraced and enfolded. We are not subject to any person or structure from the past. We get to be the seed, becoming the new world of possibility. And that's the message of this week. And I thank you very much.